Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is San Antonio College's presentation on our land acknowledgement, the updated land acknowledgement during our inaugural Native American Heritage Month at San Antonio College. Today, we have presenting with us Mr. Rudy de la Cruz, who's from the American Indians of Texas of the Spanish Colonial Missions, to tell us about the research that went into creating the land acknowledgement specific for San Antonio College. My name is Mona Aldana-Ramírez. My pronouns are she, hers, and ella, and I live, work, and dream in the land of the Coahuiltecan Nation. And I also like to pay respects to the original caretakers of bands, clans, tribes who were here for many generations and for many years, and who were the original caretakers of our land and the waterways under which we all thrive today. So thank you, Rudy de la Cruz, for being here and for giving us the knowledge of what goes into creating a proper land acknowledgement. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you to share your presentation.
Very good. Thank you, Mona. I certainly do appreciate it and all the work that you've done with our Native American Engagement Working Group to put these events together. It's a real privilege to be with you today to speak about the land acknowledgement development process as it relates to our project. I'm going to go ahead and go to a share screen and bring up some slides for us to see. Okay. And so a little bit of background on the land development, land acknowledgement development process. You know, the idea of being an expert at this process is really new. I doubt that there's really many people out there, except for a small handful nationwide, who really have done this a lot in the past. And of course, the new movements towards decolonization and recognizing those who were here before us has really kind of caught on. And so this has become something that a lot of institutions around the nation are trying to develop to give honor to those who were on the lands that they inhabit today. And so we want to do that and kind of talk about how, I was able to work through this process. And so I'm going to go to a slideshow. And so the Texas Heritage Project of American Indians in Texas is part of a heritage group, if you will, that spawned in 2014. And recently, in May of 2022, we started discussing with Alamo Colleges District Office with Dr. Eric Castillo, the Chief Diversity Officer for the district, how we could go about developing land acknowledgements for each of the various Alamo College District institutions, including their support facility. And so because I run this project with American Indians in Texas, they asked me to conduct some of the research, based on the knowledge that I had a lot of research experience and teaching experience in higher ed. And so just to kind of talk about what was expected, the whole idea was first to develop research and a bibliography and some resource materials that were specific to the Aboriginal groups of South Central Texas. And so when we talk about the Aboriginal groups, we're talking about those Native American groups that we know for certain were encountered first by Spanish explorers and others who came through the region, going back from the 1500s into the 1600s. And so these groups are very well documented in certain sources, if you know where to find them. And so what I did, using the archives that we have at American Indians in Texas, I was able to pull together some of the burial records, the earliest days of the missions, and then look at some of the letters and some of the write-ups that some explorers and other missionaries had put together while exploring this part of the world back in the late 1600s. And so for certain, I wanted to capture those groups that were here, those Native American bands, if you will, that were in the region prior to the mission era in San Antonio. And so I really wanted it to be prior to 1718. And so Friar Mansonet was an excellent source of this kind of information as he traveled right through this area, around the Medina River what we would call the area of San Antonio today. And, he came upon many Aboriginal groups while he was in his explorations on behalf of the Spanish Empire. And so he well documented the groups that he found in this region. And those are the groups that I, along with other explorers that found other groups, I listed them and identified them and did as much research as I could on these subsets of what we would now call the Coahuiltecan Indians, which range essentially from the Bexar County area down through south central Texas into northern Mexico. And so the groups that I was able to put together certainly do, mirror that kind of research in terms of the 1690 to about 1708, 1710 era. A little bit about Texas Heritage Project. It is an academia and community effort that conducts humanities-based primary research to assemble never before made public family artifacts of historical significance to the South Central Texas region. Just so that you know, the mission of this and why this project fit our mission is the mission of the Texas Heritage Project is to reverse systemic historical erasure of indigenous and Chicano people by expanding the narrative of South Central Texas through primary research that illustrates our rich contributions with the goal of fostering unity and healing for the generations. And so the project, and why I'm here before you today, was essentially a 4 to 4.5 month duration project. And we were contracted by the district to engage in as much research as we could leading up to the development of land acknowledgements for each of the different districts based on that Aboriginal research. And so I don't know that anybody has ever tried to do that specific research here in the Bexar County region to develop land acknowledgements. We could be probably one of the first to assemble the information that was gathered over the decades and centuries by other researchers and assemble it into meaningful land acknowledgement for each of the facilities. And so the proposed research activities were to generate site-specific historical and current facts regarding the Aboriginal groups of the land's Alamo College District and facilities now reside, to include the clan identification, the identification of related conflicts, wars, and genocide, victories and significant moments, both past and present, cultural impacts, and other related information. And of course, the resulting reports were going to be presented to the affiliates of the Native American Engagement Working Group, which represented each of the colleges. And roughly the timeline, without including the French too much, it was really to focus on the Spanish going forward. I broke the research into various segments, 9200 BC to 1519, 1519 to 1821, 1821 to 1835, then 1836 to 1845, and then 1845 to the present. And that would represent prior to Spanish explorers' contact of the Aboriginal bands, then during Spanish Texas, those Aboriginal bands during independent Mexico, during the Republic of Texas, and then of course our experience here in the United States. We not only wanted to establish a land acknowledgement that talks about the past, but also discusses us in the present content that we're here. We are still here and contributing to life in the United States and in this part of the world. The research bibliography that I assembled within the timeline that I had was about 50 plus sources. And I will just run through this here briefly so that you can kind of get a feel for the extent of the research that we were able to conduct in order to develop these land acknowledgements from an informed perspective. And so a lot of these researchers are people that have been affiliated with the American Indians in Texas in the past. And so I had, a lot of the pleasure of having access to these groups. And so with that being said, the 4-month duration led to all of the research and also generated site-specific data that was proximate to each of the campuses that would make their land acknowledgement unique, including some of that site-specific data into each one of the land acknowledgements, gave it a kind of identity that was proximate to their region, and also with language that bonded or, binds all of the colleges together. So the land acknowledgements will have similar language as other land acknowledgements throughout the district, but certain verses are very specific to the history proximate to that college or that facility. And so it's very humbling to see that when we think about the different types of groups that could have been here, to really see the names of these various bands. And I have them here, and we'll go over these in just a while, but I'm going to go ahead and allow Mona to ask some questions, and it'll kind of naturally lead into some of the rest of the slides. Mona, if that was okay with you, if you could just go ahead and go through your Q&A, and let's start addressing some of these specific issues within this discussion.
Thank you, Rudy. So my first question is, this was a lot of work, and this was a lot of time that you had to spend looking through sources that were not easy to find. So what motivated you about this land acknowledgement to update it? SAC had already been using a land acknowledgement that was provided by the American Indians of Texas since 2019. But what was the motivation behind digging a little deeper and finding a lot of these bands that most people have never heard of before?
Yeah, it's significant for me, very personal in the sense. This process was a very emotional process for me. My family has Native American roots that go into Coahuila, a part of the Coahuiltecan bands. But what we don't know about our family is a lot of history prior to the birth of my grandfather. And he really didn't share much about his Native American upbringing or the Native American groups that he represented. He was brought to an orphanage in 1915 and was brought up in a Catholic orphanage. We don't even really know what our namesake is. As a matter of fact, the priest of the orphanage gave all the foundlings that were within his care his last name. And so consequently, we all received the name De La Cruz. That was his last name. So it was very personal for me because I for so long wanted to find out more about these groups of Native Americans that very likely represented a lot of the culture that I came from. And so it gave me that extra drive to do that extra stuff that you would consider in the way of research to make sure I got it right. I wanted to know more about myself, essentially. And by doing this research, it helped me to understand where I came from and what people that I descend from would have lived like before the Spanish came. And so it was that kind of motivation that drove me to continue and to do this in the best way possible.
Thank you. And your quest for personal knowledge is everybody's gain, and we appreciate you for doing this work. And as I understand it, just preliminary work on a lot more good things to come, some more good research happening, so that the city of San Antonio, the entire community, can be part of this narrative change, so that we do get to know and understand our indigenous and Native community that exists here in San Antonio. You mentioned in the presentation that you were doing this for all of the Alamo colleges. San Antonio College has a specific, its location is very specific to the Native American history. Why is it? What is key about San Antonio College's land acknowledgement, and why is this important to make sure that the land around us, we acknowledge it properly? What is important about the land that our college was constructed on?
You know, a lot of the history that is documented in the letters in terms of first encounters with some of the Aboriginal bands comes from areas very proximate to San Antonio College because of the waterways and the springs, which were sources of life and centers for these Aboriginal bands to gather around. Water, obviously, the source of life for all of us. You know, and when you go back that far in our history, it was pretty simple to understand why they would locate around these kinds of springs and water sources to develop their communities and to hunt and to live from what the land provided during specific seasons. Always being near the water was very important. And San Antonio College is very proximate to all of this earliest history of the Aboriginal bands. Of course, right across the street, the San Pedro Springs, you know, a very historical place. And when you consider the gathering of many of these bands, like the Payaya, the Pajalate, the Tejas, the Tilihame, the Pastillas, and the Sulihames, and a lot of these other groups that were living in the area. And so, you know, San Antonio College enjoys a very special location in central San Antonio when it comes to talking about the Aboriginal history. And so, you know, from in comparison to all of the other campuses, with perhaps maybe St. Philip's, so San Antonio College is one of those that enjoys perhaps the richest history, and we consider its location and the diversity of Aboriginal bands that roamed and hunted and lived and died right there in that vicinity. And so for that reason, it really holds a special place.
Yeah, and it's almost like it is a call for our institution to do right by our urban natives and our indigenous folks, to continue caring for the land and the waterways. So yes, thank you so much for bringing that up. So I noticed a lot of this is personal for you. But how, when you uncovered different things and different research aspects, the process itself of doing all of the research, how did it affect you when you began doing this work and you began uncovering new clans and new tribes and new information? How did it affect you?
For years, I've gone to the outskirts of Bexar County and stood on the side of waterways and stared into the countryside and wondered who was here, what did it look like, how did they live, how did it feel for them when first encountering other groups from Europe. And so after doing this work, it helped to inform me as to what I was trying to see in the past. It's a picture that has been painted, so to speak, for me now. When I go out to the Medina River, or I go to other locations in the county that are historical in the sense of, you know, areas that Aboriginal peoples lived, I can now imagine what was there. And so that's a real powerful experience to be able to put, you know, names of bands, customs, the types of food. It's almost like looking back at a previous life that you hoped you had lived. And so that kind of research really allowed me to paint that picture mentally as to what, you know, when I drive down the freeway now and passing over so many large tracts of land at rates of speed that, you know, people just didn't travel back then, it takes me back. And it makes me think about pulling over more and more and taking some time to take a look at the region and stripping the landscape of all of its modernity and trying to imagine what it would look like back then. And so it's really an enlightening experience. And I hope that others have the opportunity to do that. You know, this next part of our research is going to take us out of the classroom and encourage faculty and students and others to go to these sites that are named in these land acknowledgements, to kind of go there and imagine what life would have been like. And it gives you a much more respect for those who have been here before us. And certainly none of that has been lost on me. As a matter of fact, you know, now that I've been doing this kind of research, you know, it's compelled me to do more. And this next part of the project is going to be exactly that, a hands-on visiting of these various locations with tour guides and things of that nature that will help them to imagine who was here prior. And not only that, but there's something else that's important about this. In times of political strife and uneasiness amongst certain groups or ethnic groups in the United States, it demonstrates to us that without cooperation, we would not be here today. When you look at the artifacts and even photographs from the 1800s of the communities that rose in this area, You see cooperation from diverse peoples, people from Europe, peoples who are Aboriginal and Native American to the region, all kinds of people working together in small communities in order to survive. Their cooperation was absolutely necessary for survival. And I wonder if other people had the opportunity to see the greater San Antonio and Bexar County region from that perspective. Would they be able then to look at their counterparts in society that maybe have different color skin and different color hair and eyes and traditions? Would they be able to look at them in a different way and be able to see them as somebody to cooperate with and to grow together with, as opposed to be involved in political strife and subdivisions? You know, looking at the past shows the necessity of us to cooperate for the future. Without that cooperation, what are we going to leave behind for those who would come after us? And so this work is extremely important in that respect. And you can see the region on the slide that I'm showing. The area in pink, kind of to the bottom left, shows the area that I was researching. And so you see Bexar County right at the top of that region. And so very significant. It gives you an idea, it takes you back, and hopefully, at least it's one of my dreams, that people will cooperate with a little bit more ease in the future, you know, when they see how necessary that cooperation was to their existence then and today.
So it's almost, Rudy, like this whole work of understanding and learning about land acknowledgements and the land that we live on could almost drive us to become more humane with each other, could almost drive us to live in solidarity with each other. There's a strong connection with what you have laid out, with understanding why we use land acknowledgement, the importance of them, and how we go about our day in our lives from this point forward, using the solidarity dividend, what we can all accomplish more together. So yes, thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for making that known. But it's more than just land acknowledgements. When we pay respect and give homage to our Indigenous and Native communities who have been the caretakers of this land, and who are here continuing on within our community. It's not just about the words, it's about the everyday things we can do to support them. What are some things that we can do to support our urban Native community today, and to recognize that their heritage, their culture has not been lost? How do we make the invisible visible again, and completely wipe out this myth that Indians were eradicated back when this country was founded, which is a huge disrespect to our current living urban and Indigenous people that we have today. What is it, some of the things, what can you name that we can get, that can help us get on this path of acknowledging that our Indigenous community and our Native American community are still here and they are still with us?
Yeah, you know, it's a lot to write an acknowledgement that talks about the past and the historical significance of those who are here today that descended from those groups. But there's something much more to this story, because a lot of the public policy that has been developed in this nation based on these racial biases that have historically plagued us and kept us from growing more than we should, that public policy has put these groups that are now called Latino, Hispanic, Mexican American, you know, they call us by various names. This public policy in the United States has put us at a disadvantage in many environments. The attainment of education, the attainment of upward mobility, the ability to have a nice home in a nice place to raise your children. So much of what has occurred in the past has resulted in public policy that puts these communities at a disadvantage. And it keeps them from achieving what we would kind of consider the American dream. And it's generational. It doesn't stop with just one generation. These things like redlining of certain geographical areas and keeping certain peoples out from getting mortgages in that area, or certain groups that are overrepresented in the penal system within our our prisons, but yet underrepresented in the halls of Congress. You know, the kind of respect that we're looking for is not just inclusion, but it's also inclusion in the American dream. And those kinds of things don't occur unless the respect comes and brings along with it public policy that changes the nature of life for those coming forward. We write these acknowledgements to look back to the past, but we also write them to set the tone for the future and for the generations to come. And so I feel that public policy is one of those areas, and you can think of many different areas in public policy where things could be improved for these people and these communities. We're not looking to negate or to dissuade or do without other cultures and heritage. We simply want to be included as part of the narrative and appreciated as such. And the future of our children to be appreciated and valued just as much as any other group. So I think public policy is a key area in all of its areas that it encompasses. Improved public policy will certainly improve the respect amongst groups. They start to feel more, part of society, the greater society. And so all that can have nothing but a positive effect on the future of America.
Absolutely. And uplifting the voice of our indigenous and native urban peoples is so important for each of us to be able to do in order for that to go up the ladder and for them to have a voice in the many different public spaces that they have not been allowed to be a part of. So I ask you this because, you know, we do not fear those whom we know. And a lot of this work has to go back many generations with very non-traditional forms of understanding where we come from and where we came from. And as we begin talking about land acknowledgements, as we began the process, people were questioning, am I Native? Could I be Native? You know, there was people have in their narrative, in their family histories and their narratives, these oral histories from elders that say, oh, and you know, how do we begin understanding if we are indigenous or if we are Native? What advice do you give anybody who is on that journey to find out about tracing their ancestral origins? Where can they begin here in San Antonio?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, one of the things you have to do is internally realize that, you know, we're still here, no matter what they call you, right? Mexican American, Hispanic, Latino, no matter the political borders that are dominant in this particular time in history, that doesn't erase who you are, right? That's very important to realize that we are still here. And in fact, we still serve in virtually every facet of society. And so once you accept that internally, because you really have to do that for yourself first, then I believe you can approach the research from a genealogical perspective, from historical perspectives, from family history with a much more open mind, and knowing that you're doing something that's real. Because so many times the idea of, well, how Native are you? Or how much blood do you really have? Those kinds of questions that, you know, do nothing but minimize the importance of the heritage. Accept who you are, know that you represent a group of people that are still here, and that, you know, it's time to be recognized. So once you walk into the research with that frame of mind, using proper software tools for genealogical research, I know many folks are also looking towards DNA, you know, studies of where they're from, but really the family core, the family unit is one of the best places to get started finding out about yourself. So many times, because of our economy and the hustle and bustle of living in this kind of, capitalist democracy, that we don't, we kind of lose touch with our family members, and we only get together during certain times of year. The idea here is to look back into your family as a resource and to, approach some family members that maybe typically you wouldn't have done so much in the past and ask them questions about what they know. You would be surprised at how much stuff families have, collected over the decades and maybe held in different pockets within the family. But if you ask enough questions, you can assemble a picture that will begin to show you a lot more about where you come from. And not only that, but you'll learn more about how other groups have married into your family and have become part of your family's story. You know, I always felt like, you know, San Antonio is always becoming. You know, we talk about San Antonio as it is, but it's always becoming something new every single day, with new groups coming to this area. And in hundreds of years from now, they're going to be able to look back and say, we were part of that picture too, because we're not just talking about what happened in the 1700s and the 1600s. This growth, this historical integration of many groups, this intangible heritage, I believe, is what UNESCO is referring to. It's something that is continuing and will always continue. Use your family units to help you get started. Then with that kind of background, can you go into certain genealogical software projects, other research and analog hard copy books, and other DNA studies with an open mind. And then when you see that perhaps the percentages are broken down in certain ways as to what makes up you in terms of a genetic perspective, you'll be able to really appreciate the various groups that are part of your family and understand how that really came about. And so I would look inward first, and then to your family, and then only then will you step out into the research tools that are available all over the United States, and especially on the internet in the digital form. And so really, I believe that would be the healthiest way of doing it.
Well, Rudy, we sure do appreciate you coming in and you giving us your time and you giving us the knowledge and giving us a lot to think about and a lot that we can begin doing. As this is Native American Heritage Month, November 2022, we want to thank you on behalf of the committee for coming in and doing this, and of course doing the work. Our full land acknowledgement is found on the SAC website, so we encourage people to visit it, to ask questions, and of course, look into your own family history for narrative telling and truth telling of what we did not learn when we ourselves were growing up and going through our history through the federally and state mandated history lessons. So we thank you, Rudy, for this history lesson.
Sure. Thank you, Mona. I certainly appreciate the invite.